it's funny that you bring up Tank Abbott now, because that actually segues really nicely into one of my next questions. And it's basically a story that I've heard from a lot of different sources, including Big John McCarthy in his autobiography. And I wanted to ask you about the Tank Abbott incident that happened in Puerto Rico at UFC 8. Since this, you were the person that this happened to. So can you give us the scoop on what went down and what happened that led to Tank Abbott being suspended from the UFC for a while?
Well, he had gotten into a situation where I insulted or offended Lorena McCarthy. You're also talking about the Alan Goers situation as well?
Yes.
Yeah. And, Tank liked to fight. That was his hobby. And he didn't mind losing. He didn't mind getting a beating. He was tough. He had high tolerance for pain. Remember, after UFC 6, the day after, he and his posse mugged Pat Smith in the elevator. Pat Smith was saved by John McCarthy and Marie Smith, who ran up there, and when Abbott saw the crew coming in, they abandoned the beating that they were giving Pat Smith in the elevator. I was having breakfast in the coffee shop with John McCarthy and John Wayne Bobbitt, who was there with a black belt in Taekwondo, asking me if he could come in the next UFC. And I heard the noise up the hallway, ran up there and saw Maurice Smith running past me, and Maurice got there first, and Abbott was, and his boys, his posse, Paul Herrera, a couple of the others, had beaten and kicked poor Pat Smith. I took him to the hospital. He had 16 stitches inside his mouth. I forget how many outside. So Abbott liked to brawl. At parties, one of the things you have to worry about at one of our parties, which always started off with a lot of fellowship in the first couple of UFCs, was that Abbott would pick a fight. That was what he liked to do for a hobby. And I suspended him, and he wrote a letter of apology, and we put him back in. And Abbott, I went to a bar with Abbott in Puerto Rico. Well, we had a policy and a marketing procedure, and we would create a little sample tape of the UFC. We did it to a lot of the sports bars or the strip bars in the given city, and they would run it as a promo. In fact, if it was a strip bar, we would go there on a Thursday night and pick out the winners for the ring girls at the UFC. And I walk into a bar in Puerto Rico with Abbott, and we get in there. He does the John Sullivan thing. I can lick anybody in the house, and he calls everybody a queer. He uses the word medico, and the whole room got quiet. And then at one point, Abbott starts giggling or laughing, and suddenly some guy came over to him and said, you are the crazy American. You're the crazy gringo from, whatever he said. And everyone was then buying vodka for us. And I must have had 4 or 5 drinks before I left. I forget how many Abbott had. And he was shaking hands, and people were hugging him. But he was ready to go in there and pick a fight. And I was with him, and I figured, Abbott, what's going to happen if there's a fight? I could see myself winding up in a hospital after this. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. That's the kind of nut Abbott was. It was crazy.
Now, I can't let you get away with this one, because you just mentioned John Wayne Bobbitt was going to fight in the UFC, so you got to tell me some more about that now.
Well, Bobbitt had actually contacted me twice. And, he had a black belt in Taekwondo, or so he claimed, from the Kukuwan in Seoul, Korea, and blah, blah, blah. And then he shows up in Wyoming, in Casper. In fact, he made the cover of the newspaper the day before the event. They were, like, local, famous national celebrity shows up to watch, the event that said, we were at, in UFC 6, we were at the Casper Event Center. And there's this picture in the newspaper. So I'm at the hotel, and he calls me and says, can we have coffee or breakfast? I said, I'm having breakfast tomorrow morning with John McCarthy. So Big John came, and all of a sudden, John Wayne shows up, and we sat down and started talking. And he was pitching me on, this may be things we could do, but I think I can compete in this event, and, I don't care who you match me with. And that was, quite frankly, that was probably as far as the conversation went, because once the brawl started down at the elevator, I don't remember if I ever finished that breakfast with John Wayne Bobbitt, and I guess, now that I look back on it, I never did get a completed application, and it never went beyond that discussion. It was really a discussion.
Wow, that's still pretty impressive, though, that John Wayne was going to be potentially a UFC fighter. That's pretty great. Now, we did just mention Tank Abbott fighting Pat Smith, I guess, extracurricularly outside of the octagon. So can you tell us any more other stories about any crazy backstage fights that may have happened with fighters or managers that happened outside of the cage?
Well, I think my memory, first of all, the funnest, maybe the wildest UFC for me was UFC 3, what I call the Ultimate Fighting Championship, because that night everything went off the rails that night. I remember T-Lot, as long producer, was screaming at me that we've got to get a decision here. Hoist wasn't coming out. They threw in the towel. Well, Howard is supposed to fight, and Ken Shamrock will come out. He's telling his father that now that Hoist is out of the event, he's done. His father said, "You're walking away from $60,000. You could beat this guy, Harold Howard, in 2 minutes. You'll take him down and put a heel lock on him, and it's over." And he didn't want to fight. But what I remember that night was chemo and bringing out the cross, which our people thought originally was a stair climber, and I had found out early on it wasn't a stair climber, and I had suspicion that they were going to be doing something spectacular. And when Hoist threw in the towel and forfeited that match, Joe Son came running out and gleefully and prancing around and pirouetting in front of the crowd and pointing and yelling. And you see, it was really Chemo that beat him. Really, Chemo beat him. Well, I looked over and Elio Gracie had given the nod to Helson. Helson was the Black Hawk of the family. He was the guy in a street fight who would go and screw you up. And I could see he's given the nod to Helson to maybe teach Joe a little respect. Joe took one look at Helson and went backstage. Somewhere between the final bout, when I'm trying to find, I'd gone out into what I was looking for was Jenham. Jenham had gotten dressed. He didn't think he needed to be available as an alternate. He thought it was going to go on to the finals, and that was it. He had dressed, and I heard he was out in the parking lot. So I went out and backed him down. He was out in the parking lot talking to some cops. And I said to him, "I need you right away. Well, you have to go fight." And he looked at me with blank eyes like, "What?" I said, "Go inside and get dressed now." And then I turned away and I sent him on his way, and I run into Joe Son. And Joe's out there, and Joe started to get me a hard time. And before you know it, he's bumping his belly into me. And I said to him one point, I said, "If you're going to you want to jump, Froggy, jump. Like maybe he's going to throw a punch or something." And then he started laughing, and he said, "No, I'm only kidding." And he wrapped his arms around like he was going to give me a hug. But for about a minute there, I thought he and I were, because I pushed him back. He pushed me with his belly, and I pushed him back. I said, if you're going to jump, Froggy, do it now. So that was the kind of night it was. I also remember that the cigar that I smoked at the party that night was the one that I remember more than any other. I remember that night thinking, as crazy as this event is, we've got a soap opera, a drama here that is unbelievable. I wanted Bob to put the camera backstage. I couldn't get him to do it. We would argue about that, and even after he bought the show, after 5, I used to come to him and say, I've seen the MTV award shows in Europe. They put the camera backstage. It's better than what goes on in front of the camera. I said, when somebody loses in MTV, he said, people are crying backstage. I said, do you have any idea what kind of a soap opera goes on? And I couldn't get Bob to put the camera backstage. Imagine if we had it back in UFC 3. We would have created our first reality show right there.
Yeah, that would have been awesome to see. I wish there were cameras back then to film some of this crazy stuff, because I've read all sorts of accounts of things that happened backstage, and unfortunately it's stuff that's just, we're never going to be careful about it.
The best show, Matthew, was backstage. You couldn't believe the drama. How about somebody like Marco Lewis, who would be throwing up and wasn't sure he's ready to fight yet? Whatever management Lewis had to put a stick up his spine to get him ready. He was always problematic. And the drama that Beach and Belco with his his girlfriends and his mother, was always worthy of a La Novella in Brazil. It was a soap opera.